Hi there, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the Wall Street Journal's Facebook Live. I'm Jeffrey Fowler. I write the personal technology column here at the Wall Street Journal.
I'm John Keegan. I'm a visual correspondent.
And John, you are the brains behind something that the Wall Street Journal has been showing off for the last couple of days. Blue feed, red feed. Can you tell us briefly what this is?
Sure. By looking at this, you'll see it's a very simple presentation here. We have two columns here. One is labeled liberal, one is labeled conservative, and you're seeing recent news that has been pulled from the public Facebook pages of a very carefully put together list of sources that align liberal and conservative.
So we're here today to talk about news on Facebook.
It's complicated.
It is a very complicated topic, and news on Facebook has actually been in the news for the last week or so. And maybe we should start just by kind of explaining to people some of the different ways that people get news and where the controversy is, and then also where blue feed, red feed fits into it. So there's two places. The first one is this thing called the trending news box. Explain what that is.
So the trending news box is actually, that's the main thing that people have been talking about in the news here. And funnily, strangely enough, it's actually kind of hard to find. Most people probably wouldn't be able to identify where it is. But it's a little white box, and you really only see it if you're looking at a desktop computer. And it's a little white box. It says trending stories, and you see a little chart sign there, and you'll see a little list of topics. Maybe it's like 5 or 10 little stories, and they have some little category items.
Right. Mine tend to be about the Kardashians. Whatever they're doing shows up right there for me. Now, the controversy about that trending news box is that Facebook kind of led people to think that this was all created by a computer. Turns out they're actually made by humans who work for Facebook, and there's been an accusation that they were deliberately suppressing headlines and news from conservative outlets.
Which Facebook denied.
Right, and so Facebook says they're not doing that, but they got a lot of heat for it, and then yesterday Mark Zuckerberg had some meetings with conservative media personalities and leaders to sort of work through and talk through this and try to reach some conclusion.
And so that that Facebook feed that you see on your Facebook experience every day when you get there, there's a lot of the news feed. There's a lot of questions about how that's put together, and a lot of the criticism is about transparency. And many people have tried to figure out exactly how that algorithm works, and it's not exactly clear.
Right. So the newsfeed then is not the thing in the top corner. The newsfeed is when you pull up Facebook on the web, it's your main experience. It's all that stuff. It's your friends.
It's your status. You'll see status updates from your friends. It might be a news story from the Wall Street Journal. It could be news of a band you're following or a new movie that's coming.
Right. And it's pretty much all you see on the mobile experience, right? You're going through that newsfeed. Now, that newsfeed has been around for a long time, and it was originally created kind of as a way to let people very quickly catch up with what their friends were doing. But as of late, it has turned more into a source of news for folks. Now, this is something we heard from a lot of journal readers about yesterday. Who wants news from Facebook? Well, it turns out a lot of us, right?
A huge amount of people get their news from Facebook. Up to 60% of people using Facebook in the U.S. say that that's one of their main sources for political news.
That's right, particularly people who tend to lean more liberal, and that's according to Pew. So if we're talking about the news feed, and that is a source of news, for years, actually, there's been a concern out there that these sorts of personalized internet experiences are creating a world where I don't see the same thing as you do, and because of that, perhaps we are entering into echo chambers, or they like to call this the filter bubble, right?
And there's a strange phenomenon where if you're looking at your feed every day and you have the same set of sources which you're getting news and opinion from, if you just see those every day again and again, the thinking is that maybe you're assuming that everybody else sees this.
Right.
And then when you do encounter stuff that is that challenges that view, it can be pretty jarring.
Right. Now, Facebook is not the only source of personalized information on the internet. It's actually a much bigger, broader question. Your Google search results are customized. Your Netflix recommendations, what you see on Amazon as well. But Facebook has gotten a lot of the criticism on this concern. And so, in fact, last year, they published a study trying to address whether this is a problem, whether they they are responsible through their systems, through their program, for closing off our points of view.
Right. So they wanted to challenge, they wanted to test this idea, kind of challenge some of that criticism. They wanted to find out, is their algorithm, which is their proprietary code that is deciding what shows up in your feed and the order and which sources, they wanted to test whether it was whether the algorithm was actually showing people stuff that was counter-attitudinal, okay, something that might challenge your worldview. And they wanted to see, was it the algorithm, their code, or was it your people's actual behaviors? So they did this big study, and their conclusion was it was actually people's behavior. They kind of found that people were seeing news and content that was not necessarily aligned with their political leanings.
So their conclusion, after studying the way that people share, and to do that, they checked whether people claimed they were conservative or liberal. There's actually a box you can check on Facebook.
So, well, it's a field you type in, strangely enough. So they don't allow you to just pick one of the boxes because people describe their political leanings in very different ways. So Facebook's study was actually pretty large, and there haven't been many studies like this, especially
because they have access to the data.
Exactly. There's many people who would kill or pay a great fortune to have access to this data. And thankfully, Facebook released this data, enough that you could do some analysis with it. And so that's what we did. This study was very large. It was 10.1 million people who identified their political leanings in their profile. And they were over 18, they anonymized them, and they tracked them for 6 months. They tracked all the content that they shared. And they looked at the sources from which that content came from. So you have the users, you have the sources, and then you have the individual stories. And they tracked all three of those things. When they tracked the stories, they said, well, let's look. Well, they took all the users and they put them into one of 5 buckets. Very liberal, liberal, neutral, conservative, very conservative. Then they had, the way they did that is they looked at all the different ways that people describe themselves, and they used some machine learning, some advanced computer code to break people into those 5 buckets. Once a story was shared, they said, well, how many people in the very liberal bucket shared it? And they came up with an alignment score for every story.
So they basically then were able to figure out from people's own behavior on Facebook which stories and which media sources were more likely to be shared by conservative people versus liberal people.
Right. So they looked at the individual stories, and then they stepped back and they looked at the individual outlets, and they said, of all the stories that were shared by people of these 5 different groups, which ones had a larger, grouping in one of those areas on the spectrum? So what we used for our project for the blue feed, red feed, was we were interested at kind of the edges of that, because that's where the greatest contrast was, and I think a lot of the emotion and kind of interest of this stuff. So we looked at stuff that had a majority of content shared from very liberal and very conservative users. So that's the very liberal side and the very conservative. We ended up with about 130 news sources, and we only used ones that had over 100,000 followers to kind of make sure that this was hard news and not, recipes or things like that. And also share content that had been shared 100 times.
So let's back up for a second. So Facebook did this study mostly to and reach the conclusion that they don't create a filter bubble. They don't create an echo chamber. That's on us, based on who our friends are. That's what that's what informs the news feed. You looked at this study and you saw another interesting potential use for it, which is to take the information, the data that they provided about where all those news sources align to do something different. Can you tell us what happened with your...
Right. So in my experience, the original idea for this thing came about from my wife. She at one point decided to leave Facebook, and I was like, "Facebook's great. What are you talking about?" And she grabbed my phone and said, "Yeah, well, your Facebook is interesting." She's like, "My Facebook is very different," and it made me think, that's right, everybody, and you kind of know this, everybody has a different Facebook feed, and you have your own, Facebook uses over 100,000 signals, which you've mentioned in your column, to decide what goes into that. So everybody's feed is very, very different. And when you have a different mix of sources, it can be really frustrating. You might be seeing stuff a lot that you're not, that kind of gives you a reaction. So, and I think there's also a phenomenon where people assume that everybody's feed looks the same. So we said, like, because on Facebook it's actually really hard to see what the other side might be saying, I was genuinely curious. I wanted to see what like a very liberal and a very conservative feed might look like side by side. You should say very clearly, we're not saying at all that this is what liberals see and this is what conservatives see. That's a vast simplification here. What we're saying is these are sources that a majority of very liberal users shared content from, and the same for the conservative side.
That's right. So this is based on Facebook's big study. You took that data and you identified the sources.
Yep.
And you split them into two columns, but we are seeing a almost live view of what people are sharing on Facebook.
Right. The idea for this is it's a lens or a pair of lenses. You can imagine the red and blue 3D glasses. To look at the topics of the news that are happening in this very contentious election season, right? So every hour we're going out to these sources and we're grabbing their latest updates, their status updates that they've been posting. Some of them are photos, some are videos, and other ones are links to other news stories. And we're including their commentary here at the top and the content that they're sharing, and you can see how many likes and shares they have. We also, if you scroll down a bit, if you click on this button up here where it says conservative or liberal, you'll see a list of sources. And I think this is an important thing because you might see, and this scrolls down here too, you get a sense of the audience that some of these sites have. And I encourage people to look at this stuff because depending upon which side of this you find most aligned to your worldview, you may not be familiar with some of these other outlets.
Sure. And again, to remind people, the Wall Street Journal is not deciding what is a liberal source of news and a conservative source of news. This is, in fact, an aggregate of American Facebook users that decided this.
These are real stories that are really being shared by millions of people who have politically identified themselves as very liberal or very conservative.
So let's talk about the impact of this. What do you see when you look at this?
It's really surprising. I mean, if you take, there's a couple of, obvious ones, topics here that I think people would look at. We included guns and abortion. And, certainly everybody's opinions about Barack Obama are clear. But Donald Trump is a little more interesting, right? So he's not necessarily embraced by all of the conservatives. So you see a very interesting kind of message that happens here. The other thing is, as this news cycle unfolds, we're going to be changing that list of topics at the top. And while we were working on this, we found some interesting topics that rose up. When Harriet Tubman was announced to be gracing the $20 bill, that created a very strong reaction on both sides that had an enormous amount of contrast.
Right. So I'm a columnist for the Journal, and I critique tech products. When I look at this, I see a product that is needed in the world by people, but Facebook hasn't made for us. In one place, I can go here to get multiple points of view on any given news topic from stuff being shared with Facebook. But when we go back to that news feed, like we were talking about at the beginning, Facebook actually gives us very, very little ability to recreate this experience on there.
I challenge people to try and do this on Facebook. I mean, it's not easy to do. And one of the things that I think is helpful about this, if you try and if you say you are a conservative, just as an example, right, and you decided you wanted to broaden your perspectives a bit and maybe include a little bit of Mother Jones in your feed, which aligns very liberal based on the data in this study. If the action of you liking Mother Jones, that's how you would follow that source. By liking that, your friend, depending upon your settings in your privacy settings, for most people, it's going to be visible to their friends, and they may unfriend you.
Right. And also, as a product, I can say, so I went through this experience of trying to balance out my feed a little more by following lots of additional media sources, and it's actually not a very good way to add things to your news feed because, again, it's an algorithm that's really designed to show you things that it thinks you're going to like based on your behavior, your friends' behavior, other people's behavior. So you can't necessarily necessarily customize a news feed on Facebook like you could maybe put together a series of things on a newsstand.
I think you did a good job in your column yesterday mentioning this, that it's kind of designed for sharing sunset selfies, and maybe not as well suited for this complicated news environment we have now.
So we're getting some good questions here on the Facebook Live. One of them is, isn't the problem here really that the media is totally biased? Why are we picking on Facebook here? So why talk about Facebook and its role in this?
Well, I mean, I think that they have a fantastic product. First of all, I use Facebook all the time, like most of the including 1/5 of the world's population now uses Facebook, right? So I think that they have pursued a very successful design of their product, and they probably weren't at the beginning assuming that they were going to be such a source for news.
Right, and as we were saying earlier, according to Pew, 60% of American adults on Facebook get news from Facebook. So you might think, I don't get news from Facebook, but the truth is, majority of American adults are getting political news, nonetheless, on Facebook, particularly people who lean to the left. So they've become this source of news. And then, frankly, Facebook as a company has been very aggressively pursuing news, right, as a business. They're encouraging news organizations, including the Wall Street Journal, to use something called instant articles, right, where we publish directly into their stream.
And Google is trying to do the same thing with their advanced mobile pages and other technologies to deliver things a lot faster, to hand over the keys a little bit to these technology companies to get this content out faster. And the concern, of course, is that they view all content equally, and they don't treat news as a special thing, which it kind of is.
Sure, which brings us back to this question. So, but isn't the problem that the news organizations themselves are biased? Well, I think what we're learning from this is that Facebook now, at least from my perspective, has to acknowledge that they are a media organization. They are just like everybody else, like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or whoever, responsible for bringing information to the world, and there's certain requirements that come with that. When you read one publication, you might know that it brings a particular point of view, and they're acknowledging that and they're talking about that. But up until the last week or so, Facebook really hasn't acknowledged that they have anything to do with shaping what kind of news we see, right?
And we've also noticed that they are aware of this. They've been posting a video that has been showing up in people's feeds. You might have seen this. And it kind of talks about the election and how you might be using that reaction icon that shows the angry face a little bit more, or the wow expression when people are posting political news. And their solution is to use their search tool.
Right.
And it's an interesting idea, and we've tried it, and using the search tool is a little complicated. It gives priority to your friends, what your friends are talking about first, which doesn't really solve the problem.
Right.
And it breaks it down into a series of tabs that are aligned around different types of content, and it's not really the kind of thing. So we're not saying that this is like the perfect solution for this. This is just shining a light on on an interesting kind of phenomenon that we've witnessed, and I think it's the kind of thing that people need to ask some questions about.
So another question from the Facebook Live audience is this sort of failing us as a product in the news, the reason why people are switching to other social media sources, Snapchat or even Instagram. Seems like Facebook definitely has some challengers out there, but particularly among a younger set of users. My view on that would be Newsfeed, which is the primary Facebook product, is getting a little long in the tooth. It's been around for a while, and clearly now people are bringing very different expectations to it. And so as a product that's evolving, to me, it seems like they need to start giving us some more controls in that so that we can kind of make it into the thing we want. Because some of this sort of specialization into other channels, some people want live things, instant things.
And it's tricky because, like Facebook, I think they do a pretty good job of communicating when they have made new controls available. And man, if you dive into that little, all your controls and settings, there is a vast amount of options you have to control the stuff. But you know, this is hard. It's complex stuff, and people go in and they look and just trying to find how to hide your likes, which is something that we were talking about yesterday,
Right.
is really buried away and it's organized in a strange way that a lot of people aren't going to figure out.
Right.
So they've been responding to in some regards, but they've got a complex tool that's made to be very simple, and that creates challenges.
Right. So you've made this is on WSJ.com. What can, if you were Mark Zuckerberg, what could you take away from this? I mean, one of the things that I thought about when I saw this, when you look at the news feed today and you click on a news article, you leave that page and you leave your news feed and you read that other article and you come back. Actually, Facebook has a thing that they've added at the bottom, which is people also searched.
It's very subtle, and I had to go back and you almost don't even notice it. But yeah, after you've clicked on something and come back to it, it populates some other content.
Right. So I'm not a product developer at Facebook, but it seems like that spot where Facebook is already giving us links to other things definitely has potential to maybe use this same sort of data to give us a mix it up button to say, like, show me another point of view, show me the other side here.
And I mean, speaking about data, I mean, there literally is no one else who has this kind of data. I mean, Facebook knows everything about you, and it knows everything about the network that you have.
Right.
So they are in a position to be able to build this in a way that no one else is.
Right. And without even having to make their own choices about what is liberal or conservative media, because again, they have the data that does that. We're about running out of time here, so before we go, what's going to happen with Bluefeed, Redfeed? Is it going away tomorrow? Or?
We're definitely going to keep it up and running over the course of the election, and we are going to be adjusting these topics as news kind of bubbles up. I mean, we've had a bunch of different topics. One that was interesting was Bruce Springsteen when he announced that he was going to boycott performances in North Carolina due to the transgender bathroom bill. That became a huge topic, and we'll be looking. You come back to this and look at it, and you'll be able to see different topics that will be changing over time. And I think we're going to archive the other ones so you can kind of look back at the election, because during the course of an election, people have a very short memory, and things that were all that what everybody was talking about during the news cycle might be, long forgotten.
Got it. So Bluefeed, Redfeed lives on through this election, at least until Facebook gives us something better, which we hope they do.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks for joining us.